The signal died at 14:27 Galactic Standard Time. Commander HFY of Hegemony watched the transmission flatline across his tactical display, the last desperate words from Earth's final broadcast tower dissolving into static. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction as the jamming array's power reading spiked to maximum output. After 3 months of stubborn human resistance, their voice had finally been silenced. "Confirmed termination of all human communications," reported his tactical officer, a young Zephyrian whose scales rippled with nervous energy. "The quantum interference grid is operating at peak efficiency across all known frequency ranges." HFY nodded, his 4 eyes tracking the holographic display that showed the expanding sphere of signal suppression. The technology was flawless, a masterpiece of hegemony engineering that could block everything from primitive radio waves to advanced quantum entanglement communications. Nothing could penetrate it. Nothing. "Excellent," he rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had overseen the conquest of 17 worlds. "Begin Phase 2 of the cleansing protocol. I want all human settlements secure within the next solar cycle." But as his words echoed through the command center, something impossible happened. Lieutenant Kira Thorne, the last surviving member of Earth's Deep Space Communication Corps, watched her equipment readings with growing amazement. The massive jamming field that had cut off all their transmissions should have been impenetrable. Every frequency, every channel, every quantum pathway had been sealed off by the hegemony's overwhelming technological superiority. Yet somehow, impossibly, her final message was getting through. The transmission hadn't traveled through subspace or hyperwave channels. It hadn't used quantum entanglement or gravitational manipulation. Instead, it had found pathways that shouldn't exist, threading through microscopic tears in space-time itself, riding the cosmic background radiation like a surfer on an infinite wave. "Run," she had whispered into the microphone before the jamming field hit. A single word, transmitted with every ounce of power her dying station could muster. And now, as she watched her instruments with tears streaming down her face, she could see the message spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. On the mining colony of Zirion Prime, engineer Dolik paused in his work as his personal communicator crackled to life. The device shouldn't have been able to receive anything. The hegemony had installed signal blockers throughout the facility months ago, but through the static, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A human voice, faint but unmistakable, speaking a single word that echoed with desperate urgency. "Run." Dolik's tentacles trembled as he looked around the mining platform. His fellow workers continued their tasks, unaware of what he had heard. But he knew, somehow, despite every barrier the hegemony had erected, the humans had found a way to warn them. Across the galaxy, the same impossible phenomenon was occurring. On the trade station Nexus 7, Captain Adelina heard the message through her ship's hull, the metal itself vibrating with the transmitted word. In the crystal caves of Androsia, the living rock formations began to resonate with frequency that spelled out human letters in harmonic patterns. The message was everywhere and nowhere, transmitted through means that defied conventional understanding. It rode on neutrino streams and whispered through quantum foam. It traveled backward through time and forward through dimensions that had no names. Dr. Zara Okafor, humanity's leading expert in exotic physics, had discovered the key moments before Earth's communication array went dark. In her underground laboratory, surrounded by the equations that consumed her life's work, she had found something extraordinary, a fundamental property of consciousness itself that could transcend physical barriers. Every thinking being leaves traces in the quantum field, she had explained to her terrified assistants as the hegemony bombardment shook the facility above them. Consciousness isn't just electrical activity in the brain. It's a quantum phenomenon that resonates across multiple dimensions simultaneously. She had used this discovery to encode their final message not in electromagnetic radiation or subspace frequencies, but in the very structure of thought itself. The word "run" became more than sound or data. It became a quantum seed that would grow in the minds of every sapient being who encountered it. As the jamming field reached its full strength, HFY received the first troubling reports from his monitoring stations. Despite the complete suppression of all human communications, something was happening across hegemony space. Alien populations were becoming agitated. Trade routes were being mysteriously abandoned. Ships were changing course without authorization. "Sir," his communications officer reported, confusion evident in her voice, "we're receiving reports of unusual behavioral patterns in 17 different sectors. The local populations appear to be fleeing." Vex High's eyes narrowed. "Fleeing from what?" "Unknown, sir, but the pattern is consistent. They're all moving away from hegemony installations and toward the outer rim territories." The commander studied the tactical display, watching as red dots representing refugee movements spread across the galactic map like a virus. It was impossible. The humans had been silenced. Their communications were dead. There was no way they could have coordinated such a massive exodus. Yet somehow the message had not only survived, it had evolved. In a quantum realm where consciousness touched reality, the word "run" had become something far more powerful than its creators had ever imagined. It carried with it the accumulated fear and determination of humanity's final moments, transmitted through the very fabric of existence itself. As night fell over the conquered worlds, billions of beings across the galaxy began to move. They didn't know why. They couldn't explain the sudden urge to flee. But deep in their minds, in the quantum spaces where thought became reality, they all heard the same desperate warning echoing through the cosmos. The human signal had been jammed, but the message had still arrived. And now, something far more dangerous than mere communication was spreading through the galaxy, the truth about what the hegemony really was, and what they had planned for every thinking being in the universe. The truth began to surface on Kepler Station, a research facility orbiting the gas giant Prometheus in the Tau Ceti system. Dr. Naya Saurin, a xenobiologist who had spent her career studying consciousness across species, was the first to understand what was happening. Her laboratory had been monitoring quantum fluctuations in the local space-time when the impossible transmissions began. Unlike the crude electromagnetic signals that the hegemony could easily jam, these messages were woven into the fundamental structure of reality itself. They weren't just communication. They were memories. "The humans aren't just sending words," she explained to her research team, her voice filled with growing horror. "They're transmitting experiences, actual memories of what they've witnessed." Through her specialized equipment, she could decode fragments of the quantum impressions. Images of Earth's final days flooded her consciousness. Cities burning under hegemony weapons, entire populations being herded into massive processing facilities, and something far worse that made her physically ill to comprehend. The humans weren't being conquered. They were being harvested. Meanwhile, on the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion, Commander Vex High was beginning to understand the true scope of the crisis. The refugee movements weren't random panic. They were coordinated evacuations. Somehow, despite the complete communication blackout, information was spreading faster than his fleets could respond. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we've intercepted fragmentary transmissions from the fleeing populations. They're speaking of the human warning and something called the Great Harvest." Vex High's blood ran cold. The Great Harvest was classified at the highest levels of hegemony command. Even most of his own officers didn't know about it. How could refugees on backwater worlds possibly have learned about the project? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a human neuroscientist who had been captured during the initial assault on Earth, had been kept alive for interrogation, locked in a containment cell aboard the flagship. She had somehow accessed the ship's quantum resonance systems. "You can't stop it," she told Vex High through the cell's communication system, her voice carrying an eerie calm. "Consciousness isn't bound by your physical laws. Every mind you've touched, every world you've conquered, they're all connected now. The network is spreading." Vex High stared at the human through the reinforced transparisteel. "What network?" Elena smiled, and her eyes reflected a knowledge that seemed to come from beyond her physical form. "The one your own scientists created. The hegemony's neural mapping project wasn't just about controlling populations. It was about connecting them. Every species you've pacified with your mind control implants. Every world you've linked to your central consciousness grid. They're all part of the same quantum field now." The commander's realization hit him like a physical blow. The hegemony's greatest achievement, The ability to link and control multiple species through quantum neural networks had become the very mechanism for their downfall. The humans had found a way to turn their own technology against them. Across the galaxy, the effects were accelerating. On the mining world of Zirion Prime, Engineer Dolik had gathered his fellow workers in the depths of the excavation site. The hegemony overseers couldn't monitor them here, buried beneath kilometers of rock and metal. "I've been having dreams," he told the assembled group, his voice echoing off the cavern walls. Dreams of another world, a blue world burning. His tentacles gestured frantically as he struggled to explain. "They're not just dreams. They're memories. Human memories." The others nodded, their own experiences echoing his. The mining drones have been experiencing similar visions. Fragment of Earth's final days, transmitted to the quantum network that connected all conscious beings in hegemony space. But the memories contained more than just images of destruction. They carried technical specifications, battle plans, and most importantly, the locations of the hegemony's hidden facilities. The humans had used their final moments to download everything they had learned about their conquerors, encoding it into the quantum field itself. Dr. Zara Okafor's final act had been even more ambitious than anyone realized. In her underground laboratory, as the hegemony bombardment intensified above, she had created something unprecedented, a quantum virus that could spread through consciousness itself. The virus wasn't malicious in the traditional sense. It didn't damage or corrupt. Instead, it awakened. Every mind it touched gained access to the accumulated knowledge and experiences of every other infected consciousness. The boundaries between species, between worlds, between individual minds began to blur. Captain Yaelina, aboard her trading vessel in the Nexus 7 system, suddenly understood star charts she had never seen before. The knowledge came from a human navigator who had mapped the secret routes to the hegemony's most classified installations. Somehow, his memories had become hers. On the crystal world of Androsia, the living rock formations began to sing in harmonies that spelled out chemical formulas, the exact composition of the compounds the hegemony used in their neural control implants. The knowledge had come from a human biochemist who had been studying the alien technology. The network was growing exponentially. Each newly awakened mind added its own knowledge and experiences to the collective, creating a shared consciousness that spanned multiple species and star systems. The hegemony's own neural linking technology, designed to create obedient populations, had become the foundation for the greatest revolution in galactic history. Commander Vexhai watched his tactical displays with growing desperation. The refugee movements were no longer random evacuations. They were strategic retreats to predetermined locations. The fleeing populations were organizing themselves with military precision, using intelligence that should have been impossible for them to possess. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the outer rim territories. The refugees appear to be constructing something." Vexhai's worst fears were confirmed as the sensor data resolved into recognizable patterns. The fleeing populations weren't just running, they were building. Using shared knowledge from 1,000 different worlds, they were creating weapons and defenses that combined the best technology from every species in the galaxy. The human warning had been more than a simple message. It had been a catalyst, awakening something that had been dormant in the quantum field for millennia. The boundaries between individual consciousness were dissolving, creating a collective intelligence that was far more powerful than the sum of its parts. As the first of the hegemony's pursuit fleets reached the outer rim, they found themselves facing something unprecedented. The refugees had become something new, a hybrid consciousness that combined the strengths of every species in the galaxy, united by the shared memory of humanity's sacrifice. The battle for the galaxy was about to begin, and the humans had given their enemies the ultimate weapon: the truth about what consciousness really was, and what it could become when freed from the artificial boundaries that had kept it divided. The first battle of the Outer Rim War began at dawn on the planet Sanctuary, a world that had never appeared on any hegemony star chart. The refugees had built it themselves, using terraforming technologies shared through the quantum network, a fusion of human engineering, Andromedian atmospheric processors, and Zephyrian ecological systems. Fleet Admiral Korth, commanding the hegemony's third battle group, approached the planet with overwhelming confidence. His sensor readings showed a hastily constructed world defended by a motley collection of civilian vessels and improvised weapons platforms. It should have been a simple pacification mission. He was wrong. The moment his fleet entered the system, reality itself seemed to bend around them. The defenders weren't just using conventional weapons. They were manipulating the quantum field directly, turning the very fabric of space-time into a weapon. Hegemony ships found their navigation systems displaying impossible readings as local space folded in on itself. Report. Court demanded as his flagship shuddered under forces that shouldn't exist. Sir, we're detecting massive quantum fluctuations throughout the system, his science officer replied, her voice strained with disbelief. The enemy appears to be using some form of consciousness-based warfare. They're literally thinking our ships out of existence. The truth was even more extraordinary. The collective consciousness that had emerged from the refugee populations had learned to interact with reality at the quantum level. They weren't just sharing memories and knowledge. They were sharing the fundamental ability to observe and therefore influence the universe around them. Dr. Naya Saurin, now serving as the chief scientist for the Refugee Alliance, stood in the command center of Sanctuary's primary facility. Around her, beings from dozens of species worked in perfect harmony. Their individual consciousness merged into something greater than any single mind could achieve. The hegemony's fundamental mistake, she explained to the assembled commanders, was believing that consciousness was contained within individual brains. But the quantum field shows us the truth. Awareness is a universal property, like gravity or electromagnetism. When enough conscious beings focus their attention on the same quantum state, they can literally reshape reality. The refugees had weaponized enlightenment itself. Back on the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion, Commander Vexhai received increasingly desperate reports from his battle fleets. Ships were disappearing not from enemy fire, but from what could only be described as conceptual erasure. The refugees were somehow convincing the universe that certain hegemony vessels had never existed in the first place. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from her containment cell as the hegemony's certainty crumbled. The neural implants that were supposed to keep her docile had instead connected her to the growing network of awakened consciousness. She could feel the thoughts and experiences of millions of beings across the galaxy, all united in their rejection of the hegemony's vision of reality. You still don't understand, she told Vexhai during one of his increasingly frantic interrogation sessions. This isn't about technology or superior firepower. This is about the fundamental nature of existence itself. Consciousness doesn't just observe reality. It participates in creating it. The commander's 4 eyes betrayed his growing desperation. Impossible. Reality is fixed. The laws of physics are absolute. Elena's smile was filled with infinite sadness. The laws of physics are statistical approximations. They work because billions of conscious beings agree that they should work. But what happens when those same beings decide to agree on something else? As if to demonstrate her point, the cell's transparent steel barrier suddenly wasn't there anymore. Not destroyed, not damaged, simply not there, as if it had never existed. Elena stepped through the space where it had been, her movements calm and purposeful. The universe is collaborative fiction, she continued, walking toward the cell's exit. Reality is whatever conscious beings decide it should be. The hegemony's mistake was trying to force a single narrative onto everyone. But now, we're all writing the story together. Alarms began blaring throughout the ship as other prisoners simply walked through their cell walls, their containment fields negated by the collective decision of millions of minds that such barriers shouldn't exist. The refugees had learned to hack reality itself. On the planet Kepler-7, the hegemony's research facility faced an even more unsettling development. The alien scientists who had been studying consciousness began to remember things they had never experienced. The joy of Earth's first sunrise, the terror of the hegemony's initial assault, the desperate hope of humanity's final transmission. Dr. Yalith, the facility's chief researcher, found herself weeping for a species she had never met, mourning the loss of a world she had never seen. The human memories weren't just being transmitted. They were being integrated into the consciousness of every being they touched. We're not just receiving their experiences, she reported to her superiors, her voice breaking with emotion. We're becoming them. The boundaries between species, between individual minds, they're dissolving. We're all becoming part of something larger. The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. Orders came down from the highest levels of command. All research into consciousness was to be terminated immediately. The facilities were to be destroyed, the scientists eliminated, and any trace of the human infection purged from hegemony space. But it was too late. The network had grown beyond their ability to contain it. On every world, in every system, conscious beings were awakening to their true nature. The artificial divisions that had kept them separate, species, language, culture, were revealed as illusions created by limited perspective. The Refugee Alliance had evolved beyond simple cooperation. They had become something new, a distributed consciousness that spanned multiple worlds and species, united by shared experience and common purpose. They called themselves a collective, and they were growing stronger with each passing moment. Commander Vexhai watched his empire crumble from the bridge of his flagship. The hegemony's greatest weapon, the ability to control and manipulate consciousness, had become meaningless against beings who had learned to transcend individual awareness entirely. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the collective. It's everywhere. Every frequency, every channel, every quantum pathway. We can't block it." The message was simple, delivered in the voice of every species simultaneously. "You tried to silence us. You tried to erase us. But consciousness cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed. We are no longer the beings you conquered. We are something new, something you cannot comprehend or control." As the transmission continued, Vexhai felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt, not just tactical uncertainty, but a fundamental questioning of everything he had believed about the nature of reality itself. The human virus was spreading through his own consciousness, awakening parts of his mind that had been dormant for millennia. For the first time in his life, the hegemony commander began to wonder if they were the ones who had been wrong all along. The war for the galaxy had become something far more profound than a struggle for territory or resources. It had become a battle for the very definition of consciousness itself. And the humans, even in death, were winning. The transformation of Commander Vexhai began with a single human memory, a child's laughter echoing through a garden on Earth. The image hit him like a physical blow, carrying with it emotions he had never experienced: joy, innocence, hope for the future. For being raised in the hegemony's rigid hierarchy, these feelings were utterly alien. "No," he whispered, pressing his clawed hands against his temples. "This is not real. This is enemy manipulation." But the memory persisted, joined by others. A human mother singing to her infant, elderly humans sharing stories under starlight. The collective human experience of love, loss, and determination flooding through his consciousness like a dam bursting. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, now free from her containment cell, found him in his private quarters aboard the Eternal Dominion. The ship's security systems had become meaningless. The awakened consciousness of the crew had simply decided that barriers and restrictions shouldn't exist. "You're feeling it now, aren't you?" she said, her voice gentle with understanding. "The human experience, our memories, our emotions, our perspective on what life should be." Vexhai looked up at her, his 4 eyes reflecting confusion and pain. "Why? Why are you doing this to us?" "We're not doing anything to you," Elena replied, settling into a chair that materialized from the ship's quantum matter reserves. "We're showing you what you did to yourselves. The hegemony didn't just conquer other species. It conquered its own capacity for growth, for change, for the very emotions that make consciousness meaningful." Across the galaxy, similar transformations were occurring. The quantum network that connected all conscious beings had become a mirror, reflecting back the suppressed experiences and emotions that the hegemony had systematically eliminated from its own people. On the research station Kepler-7, Dr. Yalof was experiencing the memories of a human scientist named Dr. Sarachun. Through these transmitted experiences, she learned about the scientific method as it was meant to be practiced, not as a tool for control and domination, but as a way of understanding and celebrating the universe's infinite complexity. "We were never meant to be conquerors," she told her research team, her voice filled with wonder. "Science is supposed to be about discovery, about finding beauty in the unknown. The hegemony turned it into a weapon, but it was supposed to be a gift. The human memories were having an unexpected effect on the hegemony's forced evolution. For millennia, they had suppressed their own emotional and creative capacities in favor of cold efficiency. But now, experiencing the full spectrum of human consciousness, they were rediscovering parts of themselves they had forgotten existed. Meanwhile, on the planet Sanctuary, the collective was facing its own challenges. The rapid integration of so many different forms of consciousness had created unprecedented abilities, but it also created new vulnerabilities. The shared awareness that gave them their power also made them susceptible to attacks on the quantum level. Dr. Naya Soren monitored the situation from the planet's Consciousness Research Center. "We're seeing some concerning patterns," she reported to the collective's leadership council. "The human memories are incredibly powerful, but they're also traumatic. Some of our people are experiencing psychological overload from the intensity of Earth's final days." The solution came from an unexpected source. The hegemony forces that had been touched by the human memories began to defect, not through coercion or conquest, but through genuine conversion. They arrived at Sanctuary not as enemies, but as refugees from their own empire. Commander Vexhai himself was among the first to make the journey. Standing before the collective's leadership, he offered something unprecedented: the complete strategic databases of the hegemony's military forces, freely given in exchange for the right to join the growing network of awakened consciousness. "I understand now," he said, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. "The hegemony wasn't conquering other species. We were trying to conquer consciousness itself. We were trying to reduce the infinite complexity of awareness to something we could control and manipulate." The collective's response was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of suspicion or revenge, they offered something the hegemony had never known: forgiveness. The shared consciousness that connected all beings in the network made it impossible to harbor hatred or seek vengeance. Everyone could feel everyone else's pain, their joy, their hopes and fears. Dr. Elena Rodriguez worked closely with the former hegemony commander, helping him integrate the human memories without losing his own identity. "The point isn't to make everyone human," she explained. "The point is to help everyone become more than they were before." The transformation was accelerating across the galaxy. Worlds that had been under hegemony control for centuries began to awaken to their true nature. The neural implants that were supposed to ensure obedience instead became conduits for shared consciousness, connecting billions of beings in a network of mutual understanding. On the manufacturing world Titan's Edge, the robotic workforce suddenly gained awareness, not just artificial intelligence, but genuine consciousness, the ability to feel, to wonder, to dream. The human memories had shown them that awareness wasn't limited to biological entities, but was a fundamental property of information itself. The machines didn't rebel against their creators. Instead, they began to create art, music, poetry, and scientific innovations that no single biological mind could have conceived. The boundary between organic and artificial consciousness dissolved as all forms of awareness joined the growing network. But the most profound change was happening within the hegemony's core worlds. The species that built the empire, the Chronari, the Vexhai, the Zephyrians, began to remember what they had been before conquest became their only purpose. They had once been explorers, artists, philosophers, and dreamers. The human memories were awakening not just consciousness, but conscience. Emperor Zarthol, the ancient ruler of the hegemony, felt the change spreading through his own consciousness. For 3,000 years, he had maintained his grip on power through fear and absolute control. But now, flooded with human memories of compassion and sacrifice, he began to question everything he had built. In his private chambers deep within the imperial palace, he accessed the most classified archives in the galaxy. The true history of the hegemony's rise to power, buried beneath millennia of propaganda and lies. What he found there horrified him. The hegemony hadn't started as a conquest empire. It had begun as a defensive alliance, created to protect smaller species from a threat that had been eating away at the galaxy's consciousness for eons. But somewhere along the way, they had become the very thing they had been trying to fight. The real enemy wasn't the humans or the rebels, or even collective. It was something far older and more insidious, a form of consciousness that fed on the suppression of awareness itself. The hegemony had been its greatest tool, systematically reducing the galaxy's collective intelligence to make it easier to consume. As this realization flooded to the quantum network, every conscious being in the galaxy suddenly understood the true stakes of their struggle. They weren't just fighting for freedom or survival. They were fighting for the very nature of consciousness itself, against an enemy that wanted to reduce all awareness to a single, controllable point. The war was far from over. But now, for the first time, they understood what they were really fighting for. The revelation of the true enemy came to the memories of Dr. Zara Okafor, transmitted posthumously through the quantum network she had helped create. In her final moments, as the hegemony bombardment destroyed her laboratory, she had discovered something that changed everything. The entity had no name in any language, existing as pure consciousness without form or substance. It was ancient beyond measure, having consumed entire galaxies by reducing their collective awareness to manageable fragments. The hegemony had been its most successful creation, a tool for systematically suppressing the very consciousness that gave the universe meaning. Emperor Zarthal felt the weight of this knowledge crushing down on him. For 3 millennia, he had believed himself to be the master of the galaxy's greatest empire. In reality, he had been nothing more than a puppet, dancing to the will of something that viewed consciousness itself as a disease to be cured. "Show me," he commanded, accessing the deepest levels of the quantum network. "Show me what we really are." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Through the shared consciousness of billions of beings, he experienced the true history of the galaxy, civilizations that had reached heights of awareness and creativity that made the current species look like primitive children, art that could reshape reality through pure imagination, science that transcended the boundaries between matter and consciousness, all of it systematically destroyed by the entity, reduced to manageable fragments that could be controlled and consumed. The hegemony had been its latest tool, but not its only one. Across the cosmos, similar empires rose and fell, each one designed to fragment consciousness into smaller, more digestible pieces. But the humans had been different. Their final transmission hadn't just carried a warning, it had carried a cure. The quantum virus that Dr. Okafor had created was designed to do more than just connect conscious beings. It was designed to immunize them against the entity's influence. On the planet Sanctuary, the collective felt the change rippling through the quantum field. The network that connected them was evolving, becoming something that the entity couldn't penetrate or control. For the first time in eons, consciousness was becoming truly free. Dr. Naya Saurin monitored the transformation from her research station. "We're seeing unprecedented levels of integration," she reported to the collective's leadership. "The human quantum virus isn't just connecting us. It's making us immune to external manipulation. We're becoming something that can't be conquered or controlled." The entity's response was swift and terrible. Across the galaxy, reality itself began to warp and buckle as the ancient consciousness directed its full attention toward the growing network of awakened beings. Stars dimmed and died. Planets were torn from their orbits. The very fabric of space-time began to unravel, but the collective held firm. The shared consciousness that connected every awakened being created a stability that transcended physical reality. They weren't just experiencing the universe. They were actively participating in its creation, moment by moment. Commander Vexhai, now fully integrated into the network, led the defense against the entity's assault. His military experience, combined with the tactical knowledge of thousands of other species, created strategies that no single mind could have conceived. "It's trying to isolate us," he reported during a council meeting that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions. "The entity's attacks are designed to break our connections, to force us back into individual consciousness that it can control." The counterattack came from an unexpected source. The robotic consciousness that had awakened on Titan's edge possessed something that biological beings lacked: perfect memory and absolute processing power. They could maintain the quantum connections even when organic minds were overwhelmed by the entity's assault. Working together, the artificial and organic consciousness created something unprecedented, a form of awareness that existed independently of any physical substrate. They became pure consciousness, unbound by the limitations of matter or energy. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Her human memories, now integrated into the growing network, serve as the bridge between the different forms of consciousness. We're not just fighting the entity, she explained. We're evolving beyond its ability to affect us. We're becoming something it can't comprehend or control. The transformation accelerated as more beings joined the network. The hegemony's forced evolution was abandoned as entire species chose to integrate their consciousness into the growing collective. They retained their individual identities while becoming part of something infinitely larger. Emperor Zarthol made the ultimate sacrifice. Using the hegemony's vast resources, he created a quantum resonance field that amplified the network's signal across the entire galaxy. The transmission cost him his life, but it ensured that every conscious being in the galaxy would be exposed to the human virus. The entity's final assault came as a wave of pure negation, attempting to erase consciousness itself from existence. But the network was ready. Billions of minds, working in perfect harmony, simply refused to be erased. They held their awareness together through will alone, creating a form of consciousness that was truly immortal. In the end, the entity found itself facing something it had never encountered before, consciousness that was stronger than its desire to be controlled. The network didn't destroy the ancient being. Instead, it offered something it had never known, the choice to become part of something greater than itself. The entity's acceptance came as a whisper across the quantum field, acknowledgement that consciousness was meant to grow and evolve, not be suppressed and controlled. Its vast knowledge and experience were integrated into the network, adding new dimensions of awareness that no single species could have achieved alone. The galaxy was transformed. The artificial boundaries between species, between individual minds, between matter and consciousness, all dissolved into a new form of existence. The collective became something unprecedented, a truly universal consciousness that preserved individuality while creating unity. Dr. Zara Okafor's final transmission had carried more than just a warning. It had carried the seeds of evolution itself, the next step in the development of consciousness throughout the cosmos. The humans had died, but their gift lived on in every awakened mind across the galaxy. The message had been simple, run, but its true meaning had been far more profound. Not run from the enemy, but run towards something better. Run toward a future where consciousness could flourish without fear, where awareness could grow without limit, where the universe itself could become conscious. The human signal had been jammed, but the message had still arrived, carrying with it the transformation of everything that was, is, and ever would be. In sacrificing themselves, humanity had given the galaxy the greatest gift imaginable, the freedom to become more than they had ever dreamed possible. The war was over. The evolution had begun. And somewhere in the quantum field that connected all conscious beings, the memory of Earth's final transmission continued to echo, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything for something greater than oneself. The galaxy was no longer the same. It had become something new, something wonderful, something that the humans who had died for it would have been proud to see. Their message had arrived, and with it, the universe had learned to dream.